might want to compare yourself to. And maybe, like, you're doing middling well on all 7 dimensions of comparison, or perhaps not even that, you know. And it's easy to become bitter as a consequence of that. It's an illusion in some sense, though, you know, because it truly is an illusion. Like, I've had people in my clinical practice and my consulting practice across the entire spectrum of human ability, from people who were sufficiently intellectually impaired and socially impaired so that it was impossible for them to learn how to fold envelopes in a volunteer position in a charity. So that would be at the low functional end. And to people who run, like, unbelievably successful organizations under unbelievably difficult conditions for very long periods of time in a very honorable manner. So really the entire spectrum. And one of the things I've learned from doing that is that people are bloody complicated. And just because they're successful on one dimension doesn't mean that their lives are all rosy and perfect along every dimension. You know, I mean, one of the most successful people that I dealt with, someone I really admired and respected, who did everything he could during the time we worked together to get his moderately sized, successful business running just as perfectly as it possibly could for his benefit, but also to a substantive degree for the benefit of the people that he was training. One of the things that people often aren't credited with if they're successful is their desire to help other people become successful. You know, if you listen to the standard Marxist trope, you'd assume that everyone who's climbed to the top of a competence hierarchy has a baseball bat with a nail in it, and anytime anybody sticks up an arm trying to also get up the rung, they just nail them with it. And it's just, nothing can be farther from the truth. You know, the people that I've met who've been really successful are so damn happy when they can find someone else who's young, who's competent, who wants things to be good, that they can lend a hand to, and it isn't even that they're doing it for altruistic reasons exactly. It's that one of the pleasures of being in a position of authority, when you have some spare capacity, is that you can help other people build their lives. And it's if you have any sense at all, unless you're really shallow to a quite psychopathic degree, then it's much more, that's a source of much more deep pleasure and engagement than the money that you're making. And it's not like I have anything against money. Money is extraordinarily useful, but to think of that as the only motivation for successful people's pursuit of their success, and then to assume that that's the only form of reward that they get from their success, is so bloody narrow-minded and unidimensional that it almost begars belief that people can assume that. It's like they never met anyone who was actually successful, or certainly haven't met any reasonable number of them. So, all right, so we have the problem. There's hierarchies, and there are people who are more successful than you on any dimension that you can manage. And you might think, well, the problem with that is it can make you bitter. And it's a real problem. You think, well, the world's unfair. It's like, well, if you had any sense, and if you took a particular successful person, and you did a multidimensional analysis of their life, you'd find that of the 7 major dimensions of life, so intimate relationships, family, time, use of time outside of work, educational status, health, resistance to temptation, say, there might be 1 or 2 others, but you kind of get the idea. Those people who are successful are suffering pretty dreadfully on at least one of those dimensions, and sometimes more. You know, and maybe they're doing well in their business, but they have an extremely ill first-degree relative. And it means many people have an extremely ill first-degree relative, right? It's part of life. Or maybe their marriage is shaky, or maybe they have a habit, like a drug or alcohol habit that they're having a bitch of a time dealing with, or they had a bad history of abuse when they were children. There's at least 1 or 2 things about their lives that are truly tragic, and often far more than one. So when you meet these people, you think, holy God, it's absolutely a miracle that you're successful, given what load you're stumbling forward with. And again, if you buy into the critical Marxist tropes, you think that, well, there's this 1% of people who dominate everything that's good, and everything about their life is absolutely rosy. It's like they live in some sort of glass-walled paradise that the rest of us are completely excluded from because those people exist. It's like, well, if you meet people who are successful, you think, well, it's actually kind of sad in some sense. Because what you see is that economic success, although it's nothing to be trivialized and certainly beats the hell out of the alternative, it does a relatively feeble job of protecting you from the fundamental catastrophes of life. And that's too bad in some sense, because wouldn't it be lovely if you could be economically successful and then you were far distant from any sort of catastrophe or tragedy, but you're not. Now that doesn't mean you're not buffered, and think, because otherwise why the hell would we have an economic system at all, right? The whole point of the economic system is to buffer you against catastrophe. But so it's a mistake to be envious, I would say, because what it means is that you're looking at someone through a very narrow lens. You're elevating them above you on that particular dimension of comparison, and you're demeaning yourself. And so technically it's a mistake, and which is why I think envy is a real mistake. It's like, what the hell do you know about the person? Unless they happen to be very, very close to you, you know. What do you know about their life? It's like, don't leap to conclusions here. It isn't obvious that they've got you outclassed on every possible dimension. And even if they do, well, that might mean you have something to learn, and it might also mean that they were the beneficiary of providence and positive fate. I mean, there is some element of luck in life, right? But does that mean we want everyone to be unlucky? I don't think so. That seems like a bad solution. And then the other thing too is you actually want there to be people who are better than you at things, because like, what the hell else what are you going to do if there aren't? Well, you want some up, right? I mean, we already discussed that. It's like you're up the pinnacle on all 7 dimensions. It's like, well, you're done. It's like, you know, welcome to the promised land. Game over. It's like you need people who are better than you think, so that you have something to aim at. So the question is, well, how do you aim at improvement without falling prey to bitterness? And I would say use yourself as a control subject. It's sort of an idea I derived from being an experimental psychologist. You know, if you produce 2 groups and you run an experiment on them, you do the experiment on one group and use the other group as a control. They're the comparison group. Well, you need a comparison group for your own project, let's say of self-improvement. And the right question is, well, who the hell should you compare yourself to if you're going to improve? And the answer is you. Yesterday. Because that's the perfect comparison. The guy that was you yesterday is exactly like you. Right? So he has all your privileges and he has all your catastrophes. He's the same guy. And so whatever's holding you back was holding him back. It's the same thing. And whatever opportunities are ahead of you were ahead of him. So you think, well, I could be a little bit better than he was. And that's a good game, because it allows you up still, because, you know, there's plenty of room for self-improvement, right? You're not going to run out of things to manage. And so you get the comparison, but it's a realistic control. And this is a very powerful technique. I learned this partly because I'm a behavioral psychologist, and partly what behavioral psychologists do when you go see them, it's quite fun to be trained this way, is they take large problems, like I need to get my life together. I'm unhappy and miserable and I need to get my life together. Like, that's way too big a problem. You're never going to solve that problem. That's just, it's too big and too vague, and everyone else has the same problem, and there's no cure for it. So it's, even though it's true to the point of being a truism, it's like, no. We want to decompose that. We want to differentiate that problem. It's like, exactly why are you wretched and miserable? Like, let's not have a one-phrase description. Let's have like a 5-page description. What the hell's wrong with you? At the level of detail that might enable you to actually do something about it. And so, you know, one of the things I do with my clients is, if they're depressed and anxious, the first thing I ask them is like, well, tell me about your sleep schedule. And a very large proportion of people, depressed and anxious or otherwise, unless they're locked into a fairly rigid schedule, have a very dysregulated sleep and wake schedule. It's very common among university students, for example. So they get up at like 7 o'clock one day and 2 o'clock the next day and 3 o'clock the next day and, you know, 8 o'clock the next day, although the 8 o'clock and 6 o'clock things, they're way rarer. The first thing is, well, like, why don't you fix that? You know, pick a goddamn time and get up, like a civilized person. And, well, here's why. You know, one of the things you want to do if you want to have a child, like an infant, that isn't absolutely dreadfully miserable all the time, is stabilize the time they go to bed and the time they wake up. And because the child is trying to stabilize its nervous system, right? Because because life is very chaotic. And what you're trying to do with the child is provide some islands of stability so that the child can organize its competence around those islands of stability. And you need to do the same thing for yourself. It's like if things are all over the place in your life, then you can start stabilizing it. Say, like, pick a time to get up. What time? Well, how about 8? Why? Well, because that's when most people get up. So here's another rule. You should do what most people do, unless you're special. Now, you might be special. Like, you might think, well, I'm the sort of person who can't get up at 8 because I'm a flaming genius. At 3 a.m., I'm inventing quantum equations that the world has never seen. It's like, good, fine. You don't have to get up at 8. Right? But if you're not Michelangelo or Einstein, it's like, do what other people do. Because they have a reason for doing it, and then you fit in the world a little better. And it's also not such a bad thing to fit in the world a little bit better, because it's just easier for you and for everyone else. And so, and then you might, okay, so then you might think, well, I can't just all of a sudden get up at 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't have the discipline. It's okay, no problem. How about you get up before 10 for like 3 days this week? Seriously, it's like, and if you have a real discussion with someone about this, you say, look, here's the deal. I know it's hard for people to change their behavior. I understand that. And what I want you to do, we're going to figure out a plan that will make things better for you. And I don't want you to agree with the plan unless you agree with it. Because what the hell good is that? We're going to come up with a plan, and you know perfectly well you're not going to implement it. And you're going to tell me it's a good plan because you're too agreeable and you want to make me happy, or some idiot reason like that. And then we're just wasting our time. So why don't we just assume that it's just as hard for you to change your behavior as it is everyone else, and you're probably not going to do it. And so don't say yes to anything that you don't think you would actually do. And then that's an exercise in humility, right? Because you know you tried to go to the gym 3 times a week and you failed. And so, like, everyone fails at it, or almost everyone. And no matter how many of those resolutions you make at New Year's, you just don't do it. You don't stop eating cake, and you don't stop drinking too many beer, and all of that. You just keep doing it. So, okay, it's hard to change your behavior. So I'm going to lay out a plan with you, we'll discuss it, and if you think that it's a good plan that you might do, then say yes, but otherwise say no, and we'll aim lower. What we want to do is aim low enough so that you have a reasonable probability of success, and it actually constitutes some improvement. Now, Carl Jung said modern people don't see God because they don't look low enough. And that's the sort of thing that he was referring to. It's like, let's say you want to improve yourself. It's like, well, how much are you capable of? You're going to leap from like you to the Messiah in 1 like week? No, that's not going to happen. Like, you might be slightly better than your wretched self in a week. 1/10 of 1% better, something like that. But it doesn't matter, because the trajectory is more important than the starting place. And incremental improvements are staggeringly worthwhile. They mount up incredibly quickly, and it's part of a reflection of this Pareto distribution issue, or Price's law, is when you start improving things, each time you improve something, you increase the probability that the next improvement will work. And so the improvement trajectory isn't linear. It's like this. And so if you can get the damn thing going, which is hard, it's hard to get those initial steps in place, then it can really take off if you're consistent with it. And so what it might mean the first week is, if your sleeping schedule is completely awry, then you get up 3 days this week before 10 o'clock, and that's like 10% better than the previous week. It's like, yes, you've compared yourself to who you were yesterday, and now you're better. And then the next thing I ask people is like, well, what do you do when you get up? Do you eat? No, I'm not one of those people who has breakfast. You mean one of those like human beings that need to eat? That's what you're saying. Oh no, I've never been hungry in the morning. Well, that wasn't the question. It's like, I didn't ask you if you enjoy breakfast. That's not the point. The point is, you had a fast for 12 hours or 16 hours, and now you get up and you have 3 cups of coffee, which is not a very good idea. And then you load yourself cognitively, and you dysregulate yourself psychophysiologically, because you hyperproduce insulin as soon as you stress yourself. You take all the sugar out of your blood, and then you're basically screwed until you sleep again that night. And so if you're anxious more than you want to be, and you don't eat breakfast, you can probably get rid of 30 to 40% of your anxiety just by eating breakfast. And you think, no. It's like, yeah, yes you can. Just try it. Try it for a month, and you think, well, I don't like breakfast. I don't like eggs. Who cares? What the hell? It's like, what kind of excuse is that? There's no excuse. It's the sort of excuse that you gave when you were 4, right? When you probably developed the habit of not eating breakfast. You haven't revisited it since then. So eat something that's sort of protein and fat heavy in the morning. And in 6 months, you'll start to enjoy it. That's a whole different issue. And then just do that 3 days this week and see if you feel better. And if you don't, well then, I'm wrong, and so much for that stupid theory, and we'll try something else. Well, all right, and we'll try it. But people come back. I had one client who was actually starving. I mean, this person was very nicely put together, 25-year-old professional woman, and all she ate was like 2 handfuls of rice a day. And she said, I come home and all I can do is I just sort of fall over on the couch and I watch the same movie every night. It's like, I don't know why I don't have any energy. So I did a careful analysis of her sleep and eating habits, and I thought, oh, well, you're actually starving. That's your problem. And she said, well, I don't like most things. I really like rice. Like, okay, so that chapter 4, it's a testament to the lack of utility of envy. That's the first thing. And it's also encouragement to be humble enough to make small improvements to who you are in the hopes that that will catch on and move you forward. And I can offer you a sort of meta strategy for that. And this is a nice one. This actually works quite well. And I do lay it out to some degree in the book. So the first thing is you might take stock and think, okay, well, what are you doing that you know that's stupid? It's like you can make a long list. Here's stupid things I know I do that I should stop. It's okay, great, that's no problem. You can ask yourself that question. What stupid things do I do that make my life more wretched and futile than it has to be? Okay, and if you do a little meditation around that and you actually want to know, you'll come up with a list pretty fast. And it's kind of a humbling exercise, right, to do that. But it's worthwhile, because if your life is more wretched and futile than you want it to be, it's possible that the reason it's like that, at least in part, is because you're doing things to yourself that aren't good for you. And so then there's a question that arises there, which would be, well, if your life isn't the way you want it to be, and you stop doing all the stupid things you know that you're doing, then how much better would it be? And the answer is, you don't know. Maybe it would be way better. Maybe it would be so much better that it wouldn't be wretched and futile anymore. And so that might be worth finding out. Hypothetically, if you don't want to just suffer stupidly, it would be worthwhile making the effort to find out. And so, I learned after 20 years of teaching from my wife to actually drink water sometimes. Okay, so now you make a list of your faults. And then you think, well, I'm not very useful and I'm really badly disciplined, and probably I won't do any of the things I need to do to fix any of that, but maybe there's something on this list that I could fix that I actually would fix. And so that's like asking yourself again, not telling yourself. It's like you're negotiating with someone who's kind of thick-headed and not very well put together. And you can't just tell them what to do because they're not going to do it. But you might be able to ask them, if there was something that they would do, what it might be. And you can do that to yourself. You think, well, I've got this list. Is there something on this list? Is there some step I could take to address something on this list that I would actually take, that I would do today? And the answer to that is almost invariably yes. You think, well, my closet is a squalid hellhole. I might be willing to take 3 of the most appalling pieces of laundry out of it and contemplate them. Something like that. Or maybe I have a stack of papers this high on my desk and it's sort of strewn everywhere. And I don't want to do anything with that, but I'll go and I'll look at the top 3 pieces of paper. I'll just look at them. That's a lot harder than you think, man. Because, you create a stack of paper like that, you walk into the room where that stack of paper is, you won't even look at that wall, right? That's because it's full of snakes, and that's how your body is responding to it. It's like, snakes, man, we're not going there. So, and I mean that technically. that is exactly what happens. It is the it's the predator detection circuit that kicks in that makes you not look at those things, and for good reason. And so if you go there and you just